Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we're diving deep into a troubling announcement. The United States is relocating troops within Poland, citing cost-cutting measures. The U.S. military has decided to downsize its presence at the Jastrzębie base near Rzeszów. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Rzeszów was a relatively quaint Polish town that suddenly became the Amazon fulfillment center for sending military aid to Ukraine. General Christopher Donahue, commander of U.S. Army Europe and Africa, explained this move as a chance to right-size our footprint. Right size, that's military speak for honey, I shrunk the battalion. Now, as he claims that this will save American taxpayers tens of millions of dollars, we are here asking the question, how will that influence the support of Ukraine? So, without further ado, let's take a look at the Ukrainian army's latest surprise for the Russian invaders.
The border regions of Russia and northeastern Ukraine have seen some of the heaviest fighting during the war. Damages have recently been reported not just in Ukraine, but also on the Russian side and in Belgorod rather than Kursk. This footage allegedly shows the operations of a Ukrainian brigade in Belgorod. Could the Ukrainians have made another incursion into Russia? Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed for the first time that Ukrainian troops are present in the Belgorod region.
On the front line, we maintain a presence in the Kursk and Belgorod regions. We continue active operations in the border areas on enemy soil, and this is absolutely fair. The war must return to where it came from.
Russia has its hands full trying to push Ukrainian forces out of the Kursk region, even reportedly relying on North Korean troops for support. If Ukraine is able to mount an offensive even remotely comparable to its Kursk offensive in 2024, then the war's current image becomes even less clear-cut. Both sides are aware that in any peace talks, who holds what and how much territory may decide the final outcome of a possible truce.
Now let's zone in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Reports by NBC News say that the Pentagon is considering pulling 10,000 U.S. troops out of Eastern Europe. The Biden administration deployed 20,000 troops to the region in 2022 following the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
For former Eastern Bloc countries like Poland, Romania and the Baltic states, US military bases have been the strongest guarantee of American protection against a Russian invasion. Although US troops have been stationed in Europe since the end of the Second World War, they were largely absent from the region even until after the Cold War, with Russia maintaining a strong opposition to an American military presence on its doorstep. After the accession of most of the former Eastern Bloc countries to NATO, Washington began working with its new allies, spreading its military influence. Poland, after negotiations with various US administrations, finally welcomed a permanent military garrison in 2023. Today, there are over 80,000 US troops stationed in Europe, including 10,000 in Poland. American military installations, including Patriot missile sites, are also present across NATO's eastern flank, with Washington even stationing nuclear weapons in Turkey.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. The decision to withdraw troops has caused real concern in Poland and across Europe, because when the Pentagon itself starts saying, we're just cutting costs, it feels less reassuring and more like a parent promising that they'll just run to the store real quick before disappearing forever. Now, the timing is especially uncomfortable as Polish politicians scramble to reassure the public that America's commitment isn't wavering. Polish President Andrzej Duda was quick to say that he knows this was coming and everything is totally fine, which, historically speaking, is usually the sentence you hear before discovering everything is absolutely not fine. Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz immediately tweeted, US troops are staying in Poland, adding that the nature of their mission was just changing. But when the changes involve the entire nature of a critical security mission overnight, it does not spark joy. Now, you might wonder why Poland and other European countries are jittery about this. Well, President Trump has repeatedly threatened to reduce America's security guarantees unless Europe pays more. And look, Poland spends a whopping 4.7% of its GDP on defense, more than double NATO's current recommended amount. But still, Trump's administration seems to see Europe less as allies and more as freeloading roommates. NBC recently reported that the Pentagon might even withdraw up to 10,000 troops from Eastern Europe. When asked directly, a Pentagon spokesperson cryptically said, "We have no force posture change announcement at this time," which is Pentagonese for "we might leave, we might not. Tune in next week to find out." Now, the Pentagon insists that despite this move, the US has more robust facilities elsewhere in Poland, like the new permanent garrison that opened in 2023 and a missile defense base up north in Rejkovo. Now, those facilities are intended to shield NATO from missile attacks, presumably the ones that Putin insists he's totally not planning. But even robust new base can't completely reassure Eastern Europeans when America seems ready to pivot its attention elsewhere, possibly to regions where it believes its interests are more threatened. And let's be clear, the game here is more than military logistics. It's also the message it sends to allies and adversaries. When the United States appears to waver on its commitments, Russia takes note. Because when America right-sizes commitment, Europe can't help but wonder what the right size really looks like. And now here to shed more light on the issue is retired General Ben Hodges, former commander of U.S. Army in Europe and Africa. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for the privilege.
Today we are looking at one of the announcements that have some of us here in Poland a little bit jittery. The announcement of troops pulling out from the Rzeszów base. Can you help us understand what is what's behind this decision? Because, well, like I said, we're a little bit frightened here.
Well, I think what we're seeing is a reorganization of U.S. forces in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe, that has been in the works for some time. You'll remember that last year, the alliance made the decision to take the mission to deliver aid to Ukraine and move it up to a NATO headquarters out of a purely U.S. headquarters. And so this is part of it. Of course, I wish that the U.S. administration would be more clear about its intentions, about what it's doing. But I trust General Donahue and how he is going to make this work, working closely with allies so that the capability to continue to support Ukraine is there, except it's under Polish leadership and with other allies. The fact is, the U.S. Army in Europe is going to have to get smaller as the administration shifts priorities towards the Indo-Pacific region. And I think General Donahue will do this in the best way possible.
So like you mentioned, this is actually a process that has been ongoing, not something that kind of just sprouted out of the new administration.
Right. That's an important point. I think while this may feel like news to some people right now, this has been going on. The administration has talked about shifting priorities to the Indo-Pacific region from the very beginning. And while I personally don't like to see reductions in U.S. capability in Europe, because I think the Russian threat is so great, at the same time, the combined capabilities of all of our European allies. I mean, if you think about it, the Polish army, the Finnish army, the German army, the French, British, and Italian armies, the Turkish army, are all larger than the U.S. Army in Europe. And so it's understandable that the United States would expect allies to be prepared to take on more of these responsibilities. The U.S. just cannot do it all.
Now, there's a report from NBC News saying that the Pentagon is considering pulling out 10,000 U.S. troops out of Eastern Europe. That's around, also the Biden administration that deployed 20,000 troops to the region in 2022. Those might also be gutted. Do you think that is a likely scenario as well?
Well, look, there's two or three things at work here. Number one, that as we talked about, the administration looking to shift its priority to the Indo-Pacific region. But they also were looking for money to save money in places wherever they can. And traditionally, the U.S. Army has been the big bill payer because it is mostly about people. And if you want to find money in your budget, the quickest way to do it is to reduce the number of people you have. And so I think whatever reductions might happen in Europe will be within the context of a significant reduction in the size of the overall U.S. Army. I'm talking about 25% of the Army being reduced. And so, of course, that would mean part of what we have in Europe would be included in that reduction. Now, the tanks, the Bradley fighting vehicles, the armored howitzers, all of the armored vehicles you see in Europe are part of what we call the rotational force. And that rotational force is paid for by the European Defense Initiative. This is supplemental money above the normal budget. That's the easiest money for the administration to cut, is for rotational forces. Then after that, then you start looking at the forces who are assigned, who are like in Europe or in Germany or Italy, for example, and other places. So I don't know, what the strategic analysis is that's leading to the specific cuts. But the fact is, the administration has made it clear that they expect European allies to take on more of the burden, and that the United States is going to shift priorities to the Indo-Pacific region, and the size of the U.S. Army overall is going to be cut significantly. So this is all part of this process.
All right, now I'm focusing specifically on this region when asked. The Pentagon is quite cryptic with their messaging, saying that we have no force posture change announcement at this time. We're still trying to decipher that. In the meantime, the Polish defense minister says the U.S. troops are staying in Poland, adding that the mission is changing, but it just kind of involved the nature of a mission in and of itself. Are we potentially just seeing more like reshuffling within at least Poland, or is it just like one step towards gradually again reducing the numbers?
It's confusing because the administration, I think, has not been clear. They still are new. I mean, many of the positions are not filled. Just this week, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Policy, Mr. Colby, was just confirmed. And this is the office that would normally be responsible for doing this kind of analysis. So the team that does the analysis, what we call the Global Force Posture Review, is just now getting into place. So the reason you're seeing confusion is because they haven't been able to do all of this analysis yet. So I think this is a part of it. And so the U.S. European Command, the U.S. Army Europe, all of these guys are working hard to anticipate possibilities, to be able to explain to the administration what the risks are and what the requirements are. And at the end of the day, of course, they will have to carry out the orders, the lawful orders of the civilian authorities once these are made clear. I think there's confusion because it's just not known yet exactly what decisions will be made. I think, again, personally, I think this is a huge mistake at a time when Russia is still such a threat. Ukraine is under enormous pressure. It's a terrible signal for the U.S. to be downsizing in Europe. But we have civilian leadership, and they make the decisions. And I have to reiterate that our military leadership, from General Donahue up to General Cavoli, these are two of the best officers in the Army today. And I think they will figure out how to do this in the best way possible. And of course, working closely with our allies in Poland, Romania, Lithuania, and elsewhere.
Okay, so we'll have to see how that unfolds. And in the meantime, I would also like to ask you a little bit about the current situation on the front line. Ukraine seems to be losing a little bit of its grasp on the Kursk region and turning its attention towards Belgorod. How would you go about analyzing that?
No, here's how I would look at that. After 11 years of war, Russia still only controls about 20% of Ukraine. Even though they had all the advantages in numbers, and even though the United States, especially recently, has failed to provide the intelligence and capabilities for Ukraine that we should, Russia still cannot defeat Ukraine. They cannot knock Ukraine out of the war. And I think reports that somehow Russia is gaining, that's just not accurate. I mean, it's been 8 months since Ukraine went into Kursk, and only now is Russia finally getting closer to pushing Ukraine out of Kursk, but there still are Ukrainian troops inside Kursk, and Ukraine has now moved into Belgorod. So I think what we're seeing is a determined resistance by Ukrainian forces. Their defense industry is growing while at war. Russia, meanwhile, has enormous economic problems, and I don't know how much longer they can keep doing what they're doing, especially if Europe were to decide that it would do everything necessary to help Ukraine win. So even if the U.S. fails to do what it should, Europe has more than enough economic power and military power to help Ukraine. So I hope that European leaders will take the necessary steps to ensure that Ukraine does not fail.
Now, recent reports about this specific topic saying that the Russian advance in taking back the Kursk region is actually slowing down. And I just want to figure out whether this is a positive message or not, because even though it's slowing down, it seems like they are still advancing towards that direction. In your analysis, is that a good sign that they're not taking them back as quick as they wanted to?
Well, what's a good sign is that Russia has not been able to increase its control over Ukraine despite all the years of advantages and despite the failure of the West to provide Ukraine everything it needs. That Russia still cannot increase what it has. They have not been able to regain control over the Western Black Sea. They still have failed to achieve air superiority, which for any Air Force is job one. So I think Ukraine can see that they are in a better position maybe than people in the West perceive because of terrible reporting about, Russian advances, which is just not true. I mean, take a look at the map, and anybody that can read a map can see that Russia is not advancing in any meaningful way. That the only thing the Russians can do is continue killing innocent Ukrainians by bombing and launching missiles and drones against towns and cities. So I think that this is where Poland and Germany and Finland and France and Italy, other European countries need to make the decisions to ensure that Ukraine defeats Russia inside Ukraine so that this war does not spill over anywhere else. This is in the interest of Europe.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight and helping us unpack all of this. Really appreciate it. And thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East I don't want to miss. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the capture of Chinese nationals fighting for Russia. The Ukrainian president says he will be seeking an explanation from Beijing.
2 Chinese citizens fighting for Moscow were reportedly captured in the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian president says that the country's authorities are in possession of the 2 Chinese men's bank cards and personal information. President Zelensky claimed that Kiev has evidence of more Chinese nationals fighting on Russia's side and has instructed the Ukrainian foreign minister to seek an explanation from China. Neither Moscow nor Beijing have commented on the situation. China has presented itself as a neutral party in the conflict and has denied selling arms to either side. However, Beijing and Moscow have remained close allies, deepening cooperation in various sectors since the war's outbreak. Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with his Russian counterpart on several occasions and offered only words of praise for Vladimir Putin.
The Russian parliament has ratified a strategic partnership treaty with Iran, signed by the leaders of both countries in January this year. The deal will allow Moscow and Tehran, both currently under heavy Western sanctions, to deepen ties.
MPs in the lower house of the Russian State Duma have just brought Moscow and Tehran closer together. By ratifying the 20-year strategic partnership, Russian lawmakers have opened the floodgates for much deeper cooperation between Iran and Russia in the areas of defense, intelligence sharing, trade, and even nuclear energy. One of the treaty's most important provisions commits both sides to countering security threats and refraining from aiding an aggressor in the case of an attack. Interestingly, unlike in the case of Russia's recent strategic partnership treaty with North Korea, the Iran treaty does not seem to include a clause permitting the deployment of troops to support military operations or establish a formal military alliance.
China has been pushing to expand its role as a major arms supplier in Central Asia. Uzbekistan is reportedly considering purchasing Chinese jet fighters.
China has already made powerful inroads into Central Asia by becoming the region's leading trading partner. Beijing is keen to grab even more, however, as it is also interested in becoming dominant on the region's weapons market. It wasn't that long ago that China was a completely non-existent player when it comes to arms supplies in Central Asia. For the vast majority of the post-Soviet era, Russia remained king in that role, partially due to the heavy ties stemming from the region's Soviet past. Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, however, its arms deliveries have plummeted, as it has had to focus on manufacturing weapons to support its war effort in Ukraine. This opened up opportunities for several interested parties to step into Central Asia, including Belarus, Turkey, several Western countries, and of course China itself.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.